and to live Islam despite whatever opinion that people harbor for us. Because if our kids see us being hypocritical or cowardly, forget about it. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Imam Mark here with our episode of the follow-up, and that was just listening to a brief segment there of last Friday's khutbah, the topic of which was superficial unity and how do we deal with the challenge of superficial unity and making actual unity. And one of the subtopics of superficial unity was talking about the need to be proud of who we are, meaning not prideful like kibr, right? But to be comfortable being Muslim, to be unapologetic about our Islam, and to be comfortable being different, or as I would sometimes prefer to say, comfortable being distinguished. Because if we look at the way that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the way that he coached his fledgling community, he did not coach them to be completely different. He coached them to be distinct. And that part of that distinction meant leaving off some things that other people did, like especially things that had a religious significance, perhaps in other traditions. Others, he actually had the leeway to adopt for his and therefore for the Muslims' own. So, for instance, when the Prophet ﷺ came to Yathrib, he found the Jews of what would become known as Medina. He found them fasting in commemoration of Allah saving the children of Israel, Bani Israel. And he saw that they were fasting in commemoration of this, and he said, well, we have more right to Moses, to Musa alayhi salam, than you do. So then that was something that was co-opted. Another was, he told his companions, some days wear a thobe and some days wear an izar, which is like the sort of, I think you see maybe in some places in like Southeast Asia, they wear like a lungi type of thing, right? It's like a something you tie around, right? And thobe, which I always found interesting. We actually don't know what really a thobe quite looks like. There's not a lot of description of it in the hadith literature, that a lot of times it's used just interchangeably with like libas, clothes, right? So he said, because some days the Quraysh or the mushrikun, some days they dress like this, right? So you dress a little bit different, right? So you just be, not alien, but distinguish yourselves, or in the way that he told them to, grow your beard, trim your mustache. Some have interpreted it as shave, but by and large, most understood it to be to trim, right? To have been completely different would have been to just shave it completely off, right? Because the Jews had beards, and some of the pagan Arabs had beards, right? So the totally alienating thing would have been, okay, we're just going to all go clean shaven. And yet he told them, right, grow it, but, trim here, just to be distinguished, right? So that was one of the things you were talking about, was the need for us to get back to a psychology and behavior of being comfortable with who we are. And I recognize that, we live in a time that is challenging, but I would say it's certainly no more challenging than the time that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam lived in. So that's why, you look at the wisdom of, why would Allah, send his Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam and then have him go through all these difficulties and all these trials and tribulations, Well, we're going to need to go through trials and tribulations. We're going to need to know how to deal with popularity contests. We're going to need to know how to deal with the allure of acceptance and power and all those things, the seduction of that, and the risk of losing one's sense of self, right? Um, so there's a lot of wisdom, in all of that. So he had talked about, part of that, and again, because of time constraints, I didn't have, obviously a lot of time to go into it in depth and detail. But I think this is an extremely important thing for us to think about today, to contemplate, and as I had alluded to just briefly, especially for Muslim parenting. I have a lot of parents that come to me about their kids and want me to counsel their kids, or a lot of times when they say counsel, they really mean fix. And, I am A, not a mechanic, and your children are B, not automobiles. I cannot just take out your kid's iman or doubt that she or he has in their hearts like a bad transmission and put a new one in and everything is fixed, right? It's actually a lot more complicated than that. Um, and when sometimes we examine the family dynamic as to why some of the kids are struggling, sometimes it's due to insufficient demonstration by the parents, and then sometimes it's not. Uh, I've known parents that are extremely pious, practicing, right? Then sometimes it comes down to the communal demonstration, right? Not to be cliche-ish, but we all know the term, right? It takes a village to raise a child. Well, it may take a village or an ummah or a majmu'ah or something, right? The equivalent to raise a Muslim child. Um, and I do believe one of the biggest traps that we can get into, especially as Muslim parents, is to feel that, okay, I have to have some sort of perfect demonstration. Obviously, having an imperfect demonstration, meaning, being totally lax, like not praying or not making an Islam a priority, that's obviously setting a bad example. But don't fool yourself that if you do those things, that it will necessarily, right? Especially, it really depends on what the broader social context is like. And I think we have to face facts that growing up in this part of the world, growing up in America, we're increasingly living in a time where, one, there's like an abundance of choice as to who a person can be. And that's no longer just an options of, I want to be a fireman or a doctor or an astronaut, right? I mean, we're now being presented where you can just select your gender and other things like this that are completely bonkers. And these things confuse kids. Um, so communal demonstration is very important of, you know, broadly what what do Muslims stand for? Broadly, what does Islam stand for? And then leaving enough wiggle room so that we don't shut people out. That, okay, if you're not praying 5 times a day, there's just simply no room for you in this community, right? And we have to, I think, find the sweet spot between compassion and promotion. Compassionate to those that maybe don't do what Allah. Let's be blank, right? It's Allah has commanded us to do certain things, like pray 5 times a day. There's no getting around that, right? Um, and yet, a person may fall deficient in that. So we want to find a way to be compassionate towards people like that may be deficient. But at the same time, we don't want to promote, in the name of compassion, something that is actually not only wrong, but potentially punishable in the hereafter. We don't want to, in the name of a kind of false humanism or something, that we say, well, you're not doing the things that Allah has commanded you to do in this life, but as long as you're a good person, that's fine. Because now we're actually saying, well, the salah, the performing of the things that Allah commands you, like praying, fasting, giving to charity, feeding poor people, all these kinds of things. Well, these are just incidentals, right? They're kind of niceties. It's like an option. You want power windows or you don't want power windows. It's just an option, right? So I think we have to be careful between balancing the sweet spot between compassion and promotion, and making sure that our compassion is not mistaken as promoting those things that that simply that are simply wrong. Um, and I think one of that so that really illustrates, right, the importance of community. And I know, we're living in this time of unmasked, and uh, I know a lot of people are deeply traumatized by their experiences in the Muslim community. But I feel like one thing that allows this trauma to get out of hand is that people are not being rooted on knowledge. And by knowledge, I don't mean, being a hadith master or grammarian or anything like this. I mean just foundational knowledge of La ilaha illallah, meaning that Allah is Allah. Allah is who He says He is, according to His book and to His Prophet, according to the attributes that He describes Himself with, such as Ar-Rahman and Ar-Rahim, most merciful, most compassionate, Al-Khaliq, Al-Qahhar, Al-Jabbar, right? The Creator, the Compeller, the most powerful, so on and so on, right? That kind of knowledge. And therefore, that kind of knowledge will give us a sense of who we are, independent of our experiences in the world. Meaning that if I go to a masjid and I have a bad experience, it allows me to compartmentalize it just as that, okay, that masjid has a problem, or these masajid, or the time that we live in, right? And that just means we have a lot of work to do to put in to make those changes. I do like to push back on the kind of unmasked, community where, it's like people just throw in the towel. And one thing that you have to give recognition for is, yes, the uncle, auntie generation, they may make mistakes, they may do things, but one thing they did is they were willing to sacrifice, particularly their money and to some extent, right, their time. I do not see that same level of commitment from this generation that to a large degree has had everything handed to it. It may not like what was handed to it, but it's had a lot of what's handed to it. And because it didn't like the way that things were handed to them, instead of rolling up their sleeves and getting to work, it's really kind of devolved down into kind of like a pity party and a having a temper tantrum, or just taking your marbles and walking away. And there's no success. I don't believe Allah will grant any success in that. And I think that's why we're seeing, so much chaos that we're having in our community. So community is really important. And there was a hadith that I was going to mention but didn't have time to in the khutbah. And it's related by Abu Darda, and radiyallahu anhu, may Allah be pleased with him. He said, I heard the messenger, سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول, he said, I heard the Prophet saying, he said that, ما من ثلاثة في قرية ولا بدو لا تقام فيهم الصلاة إلا قد استحوذ عليهم الشيطان. So Abu Darda says that there are, either in a village, في قرية, أو al-Badu, right? Either in the village or even some Bedouins living out in the middle of the desert, right? And he said, لا تقام فيهم الصلاة, if they don't establish the prayer, right? إلا قد استحوذ عليهم الشيطان. This is a sign that shaitan has achieved mastery over them, right? So just three people in a desert, or in a town, or in a village, or whatever, and if they don't come together, then this is a sign that shaitan has achieved mastery over them. He said, فَعَلَيْكُمْ بِالْجَمَاعَةِ, and therefore establishing the jama'ah is incumbent upon you. And some people said this word here, jama'ah, refers to the salah and jama'ah, but others have said this just refers to established community, right? So the Prophet ﷺ didn't repeat. He said, فَعَلَيْكُمْ بِالصَّلَاةِ, or فَعَلَيْكُمْ بِالصَّلَوَاتِ. He didn't say, if you haven't established the prayer, Shaitan has gained mastery over you, therefore establish the prayer. He says, no, what? فَعَلَيْكُمْ بِالْجَمَاعَةِ. Make the group, make the community, right? Because out of the community will come the salah, right? So even though that's one way to interpret what the Prophet ﷺ is saying here, I'm emphasizing the fact that prayer, which is just one of the things that we're commanded to do, right? Prayer will come out of the establishment of community, right? فَعَلَيْكُمْ بِالْجَمَاعَةِ. And in fact, he doesn't say عَلَيْكُمْ بِالصَّلَاةِ because in some ways this might already be known, right? Like, okay, وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةِ. Allah says many times, right, and establish the prayer, right? But in this case, he's saying, giving us a reminder that we may not have fully been cognizant of, which is what? Establish community. And that means that we cannot settle for, well, I was mistreated or this or that. I'm not denying that. I remind everybody, I am the imam who was mistreated and I quit my job at a masjid and alhamdulillah came and opened up something else, not to break off from the community, but to provide services and a space that just weren't being met in the hopes of trying to fix the community. And I'm not here to, ring my own bell. I'm just saying that wherever you are, I feel your disenchantment, and I sincerely do. But we've got to do a better job, and we can't give in to disparity because what's the alternative, right? And if we are believers in Allahu la ilaha illahu, right? If we're believers in that there is no God but Allah, and if we are believers that not only is the Prophet ﷺ his messenger, but he is a source of authority over us, that we are obliged to follow the Prophet ﷺ in his mannerisms, but also in his commands. فَعَلَيْكُمْ بِالْجَمَاعَةِ, right? Then we have to establish community. And, the hikmah of that is that out of community, all of these wonderful things happen. And we just experienced that here with Ramadan this year. It was very nice, very wonderful. And there was a great sense of community development again this year, where I saw people coming together, not just people that normally rub up against one another, but I saw people who perhaps didn't normally rub elbows with one another, but, through coming together for the prayer, coming together for iftar, breaking bread with one another, staying up for the night and praying, and then sometimes just, chopping it up and getting to know one another, we have, alhamdulillah, built a stronger sense of community, right? So he continues by saying at the end of this hadith, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says, فَإِنَّمَا يَأْكُلُ الذِّئَبُ. Right, he said the wolf only eats what? مِنَ الْغَنَمِ الْقَاسِيَةِ. The wolf only eats those animals, those sheep, if you will, that stray far from the flock. And I feel that there's a lot of us that are getting eaten up because we're straying far away. Not in the normal of you're straying from this, particular minhaj or madhab, right? But just you've strayed from the group. And that I think those that are disenchanted and are in danger of being led astray, they have to see that, I'm not going to make it, right? It's like you can't swim across the ocean by yourself. You're going to need to lash your raft on to somebody else's, right? I need to lash my raft to you, you to me, and you and I to some other people, right? So we can make it through this life successfully. So our kids can make it through this life successfully. So, just one of the things that I didn't have time to go into that I hinted at was really taking that chance, having the courage, even though you may have been wounded, insulted, traumatized by your experience in the community, to be that change, to be vulnerable, right? A lot of what it comes down to, we've been hurt and we just don't want to get hurt again. And life is full of pain and there's no way around that. And the only way that this is going to get fixed, it's not by us crawling off in some sort of, you know, liberal, atheistic, humanist corner to lick our wounds, in a state of disobedience until the final hour comes. But it is to, you know, nasta'inu bis sabri was salah, right? To, as Allah says, right, persevere with, persevere particularly through prayer. So فَعَلَيْكُمْ فَعَلَيْنَا بِالْجَمَاعَةِ, as the Prophet ﷺ says, I think we have an obligation to establish community. So if you're here in the Inland Empire, come and join us. If you're around, wherever you are, try to find like-minded people. I'm sure there are, and it doesn't always have to take a lot of money, right, to get something going. I encourage people, fast Monday and Thursday, and then invite people to your house for dinner, or your apartment, or the study room at your MSA, or whatever. Take steps to build a sense of community and have the courage to be that one person that, even though you've been hurt, I like to think that, time may not heal all wounds, but Allah does, right? And that is, as we say, what it is, shifa'un lima fi sudur, a cure for what is in our hearts. And may Allah cure our hearts and heal us and give us the courage to please Him and to live for His sake, so that we leave this life pleasing Him and well pleased and enter into His garden. Wa jazakum Allahu khairan. This has been another episode of the follow-up with Imam Mark, signing off from Middle Ground in Upland, California. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.